well, so shall we go live?
Yep.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah, can you just go full screen, please, Vivian? Perfect.
Well, good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me, and thank you very much for joining this Energy Networks Association Energy Innovation Forum webinar on delivering net zero. It's Matt Hindle from ENA here, Head of Gas. I'm joined by Randolph Brazier, our Head of Innovation and Development, and we've got a host of panelists who we'll introduce later who are going to be taking you through Energy Networks innovation activity and some specific projects as per the agenda. We're just going to kick off with a bit of housekeeping. So we have a large number of attendees today. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us. This is going to be an interactive session. We've got a number of points for Q&A and for feedback, but please do stay on mute throughout the session because of the number of people we have on, so that we can make sure it's clear and easy to follow for everyone. If you're having any technical issues with the WebEx, please do let one of us know. You can email us, you can use the Q&A function, various ways to contact us, just let us know. We'll be controlling the slides centrally, so please bear with us on that. For audience interaction, as I say, it's really important that we get your views as we go through the presentations today. We've set up a series of polls using Slido, so please go on to Slido, slido.com or sli.do. You can use the event code EIF6, and I've just put a first poll live on Slido now. So if you'd like to log on and test that, you can just have a look. You can see that displayed on the screen. You can register who you're representing today to let us know where you're coming from, and check that the system is working. And I can see a number of responses flooding in now, so clearly that's functioning. You can refer back to that during the presentations. It also has a Q&A function where you can submit your questions to the panelists, so please do so as you go along, and then we've got sort of specific Q&A sessions at the end of presentations where we'll pose as many as possible to the speakers today, and we'll also have a chance for some general feedback at the end of the session. So today's agenda, which hopefully you've seen, we're going to give a bit of an introduction to ENA and to innovation collaboration between the networks. We're then going to talk specifically about the innovation strategies that we launched a few months ago, the revised gas and electricity strategies, which give an overarching view of our priorities and our innovation activity. We'll have a Q&A session around that, and then after the break we'll get into some specific projects. So we'll be hearing from the H21 hydrogen project, the presumed open data project, Zero 2050 on South Wales, and then we'll conclude and round up at the end. So very briefly to introduce Energy Networks Association. We're the trade association for both gas and electricity networks at transmission and distribution level across GB. So you can see all of the networks there who form the core of the ENA membership. And it's important to say that because of this membership, because of our remit, we take a whole systems approach to the energy system, both in terms of what we deliver today and in terms of the challenges of the future. And our innovation activity supports both of those aims. It supports us in delivering efficiently for customers now, and of course it supports us in delivering for the future. And that's what you'll hear more about as we go through the strategies and through some of the individual projects as well. So if I give a brief overview of innovation funding, just to get everyone's eye in. So all of the networks are currently in the RIIO-1 price control. So that's a price control mechanism that sits above all network activity. We're in the final year of RIIO-1 for the transmission and for the gas distribution networks. A couple of years still to run for the electricity distribution networks. But the two key mechanisms under that framework, which have supported all of the projects that you'll be hearing about today, are the Network Innovation Allowance, NIA, which aims to support smaller innovation projects that, particularly those that are going to deliver benefits to consumers, and also those that support underpinning work for the bigger and flagship projects which are funded under the Network Innovation Competition. And that is really about those flagship projects that deliver low carbon environmental benefits to customers. Since the inception of innovation mechanisms in 2004, over 2,000 network innovation projects have been taken forward. So there's been a huge amount of activity in this area. And we'll be giving a few links in a second, which will kind of speak to how you can find out more about all of those projects and get involved if you aren't already. I'll hand over to Randolph now, who's going to talk to you about how ENA supports that innovation activity.
Many thanks, Matt, and good morning, everyone. I'm Randolph. I'm Head of Innovation at ENA, and it's wonderful to be here today and wonderful to see so many of you on the call. These sessions are really important to us, so thank you for joining. So I just want to talk briefly about the role that ENA plays first, and then also how you can get involved going forward. So as Matt has already indicated, at ENA, we bring together all of the innovation managers from all of our membership. And we do that to consider challenges that require innovative solutions, share learning and collaborate, and develop robust processes for collaboration and dissemination. We do this via two key working groups at ENA. One's called the Electricity Innovation Managers, or the EIM. The other one's the Gas Innovation and Governance Group, or GIG. These two groups work together very closely, and you'll be hearing from the chairs of these two groups today. These are our most important groups for innovation at ENA. As ENA, we also maintain the sector-wide innovation strategies on behalf of members. Again, they're governed by these two groups, and you'll learn about these in the first half of today's webinar. So one thing that people keep asking us is what is our focus areas at the moment? As Matt indicated, we are entering a new regulatory period, RIIO-2. That's going to be next April for gas and electricity transmission, and then it'll be 2 years later for distribution. And we got a wide area of focus areas that are very important to make sure that we disseminate the learning from our projects and the objectives that we set in our strategies. So some of these include more engagement with third parties in network innovation, and that's you. So we want you guys to get more involved in the innovation projects we run. We are developing a consistent framework for measuring the benefits from network innovation. We're working on that at the moment. It's nearing completion. We're then going to be updating our innovation portals to support this, and that'll be live, ready for RIIO-2. We're improving how we track innovation and how it's rolled out to business as usual. how we report on innovation, and how we disseminate the output of innovation to yourselves and also between our members. And you'll see some polls later asking you guys how we can do this better and how we can get you more involved. And as I mentioned, we're also updating our portals, which I'll talk about on the next slide. So if we can briefly move to the next slide, thank you. So we have two portals. One's called the Smarter Networks portal and one's called the Network Innovation Collaboration portal, or ENA collaboration portal. The first one is a database of all of our previous network innovation projects. So as Matt said, we've got over 2,000 in there. This is effectively the project catalogue of all previous and live projects. And that's where we disseminate all the outputs and data from the projects as well. So that's a free tool to use. Similarly for the collaboration portal, free to sign up to, and this is effectively a two-way communication tool between third-party innovators and networks. So it enables you to pitch your innovation project to us. Those pitches go directly to the innovation managers. And then in the EIM and gig groups that I've described earlier, we very much discuss those and agree how to take them forward. You will also receive notifications in this portal from us when we need specific help in certain areas. So when we're looking for ideas or we've got a particular challenge problem that we need to solve, you'll also hear from us via that portal. And just more generally, these portals are one of the key ways that we engage with and access our stakeholders. So if you haven't already signed up to these, strongly recommend that you do. They will be getting a facelift, as I said, to include some of the benefits reporting framework and also some other changes to bring them up to modern standards. So do get involved in those. The next part is just a link to our innovation strategies. We'll of course be sharing these slides with you after the presentation, so you'll be able to access the strategies via those links. And finally, one of the key roles for ENA and that Matt and I undertake is around dissemination. So we have our annual Innovation Dissemination Conference. You guys would know these as maybe LC&I or the Gas Innovation Showcase events. Situation, we move to more digital format for these. And we're investigating what that will look like at the moment, but it will likely be a similar time towards the end of all of the innovation projects that we're working on at that. And then hopefully next year we'll move back into a bit of an in-person conference as well. We also your innovations, which is today. This is our 6th one. And finally, we run a range of competitions on strategy. Also for ideas, for example, our network innovation competition call for ideas. And again, we'll be asking how we can better disseminate the learnings to you going forward. So at that point, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Ian and John, who are going to tell about our strategies. Over to you guys.
Thank you, Randolph. I'm Matt. So good morning, my name is Ian Cooper. I'm the Innovation Lead at UK Power Networks and the Chair for the Electricity Innovation Managers Group. And this morning, John Richardson, my equivalent at SGN, and I will be taking you through these strategies. Because as Electricity Networks, we recognise that our role is fundamental to our society and actually to fulfil a social good. And that we have a clear purpose and an objective in terms of helping our whole society reach net zero while keeping everyone warm and keeping their lights on. And so we know that we need innovation to do that, and to do that in a way that is cost effective and that benefits all of our customers. But it's what we put into these strategies is not just our view. It's also what you've said, our stakeholders, you and those who've been involved in the consultation, and John's going to talk a little bit more about those in a minute. And also, part of why we publish these is because we want you to come along on the journey with us. We want you to innovate with us, to help overcome the challenges of reaching net zero and to help us support our society in which we all live in a way that is more cost effective, more efficient on the road to zero. So in 2020, we have revised our innovation strategies. As you can see on the slide in front of you, there are 3 documents. There is a lot in common across these documents and some areas which are different. And let me talk you through those bits for a moment. So there's a common summary. The document on the left, the at a glance, is if you're short on time, read that one. That has the common themes and the common principles that underlie both the gas and the electricity innovation effort that we're putting together. And we'll give you the brief summary of what's contained and everything that you need to know. If you have a particular focus more towards electricity or to gas, then look at either the electricity strategy in the center or the gas strategy on the right, which contain more detail in terms of case study examples, themes, and more detailed breakdown behind each of the areas within the strategy, which hopefully will help give you more steer in terms of where we're going at a little bit more detail level, and more direction in terms of how you can get involved with us. So Vivian, if we have the next slide, please. As I said, at the heart of these is a set of common themes and common principles and outcomes, and these surround three key objectives for network innovation. These are primarily, we need to maintain a safe and resilient network. We need to keep people warm, and we need to keep people's lights on, and more as everyone is working at home at the moment, we need to keep people's broadband and computers up and running so that you can actually carry on your work wherever you are as you need. We also need to meet the needs of our consumers and users, whether it's domestic customers, industrial, commercial, generation, anyone. We need to support and underpin you and enable you to do what you want to do to go about your life. We also need to deliver an environmentally sustainable network. We're really aware of our role as electricity and gas networks on the road to net zero, both in terms of our own operations, but more fundamentally in terms of our society as a whole. How do we enable that across everyone's activities and what everyone does? Around this core, there are some principles and some themes. So the principles apply to every innovation project that we do. So every innovation project that's done by a gas or electricity network funded through the innovation stimulus mechanisms that we have to us should have a clear customer benefit. It should involve collaboration, both across networks, but also with other organizations. It should have a consideration towards its carbon impact in terms of whether or not it is something focused specifically on net zero and the energy system transition. We have to consider our impact on the environment. It should have a consideration towards the data that it's creating and the outputs that it's producing and how that can be shared. And it should have a clear view and direction towards how it is scaled up and rolled out across not only the network that's carrying out the innovation, but across all of the other networks as relevant for the technology or solution demonstrated. There are also a number of shared innovation themes, and these are specific. And so a project may focus on one theme and one theme alone, or it may be working across a number of different themes depending on the topic area. These are consumer vulnerability, looking after those who are most in need and ensuring that no one gets left behind. Net zero and the energy system transition. So very, very, very key theme there, and we're going to explore that in a little bit more detail in a couple of slides' time. Optimized assets and practices. Ultimately, our core business as networks is operating and maintaining large networks which transmit energy and distribute energy to everyone, within the UK. And so it's really important to us to be able to innovate, to improve how we carry out our business, and ultimately to deliver benefit from that to you, all of our consumers. The fourth theme is flexibility and commercial evolution. Actually, as more technology, as more variability comes into both the electricity and gas networks, we need to be able to cope with that, but also to make the most of it in terms of being able to respond to the electricity that's generated when the sun shines and the wind blows, as opposed to generated when the electricity is needed by consumers. And we need appropriate commercial models to underpin that and ensure that the money flows where it should and is shared appropriately between all the different organizations involved. And finally, we need to consider the whole energy system in our innovation. So a focus on what are the interactions between not only distribution and transmission within either electricity or gas, but across gas or electricity, and taking the whole energy system from end to end into account. There are a number of trade-offs that can be made, and on opportunities potentially for one energy vector to support another. And so that is a key focus of our innovation and the last of our innovation themes. So I'm now going to talk you through the principles in a little bit more detail, and then into focus on one of those themes. But overall, these provide a clear strategic direction, both for electricity and gas networks, in terms of the innovation that we do, but also out to you, to our wider stakeholder community, as you come and innovate with us in terms of the areas that we are looking at. Vivian, if you have the next slide, please. So let's look at these principles in a little bit more detail. So these should apply to all innovation projects. So anything that we do should take all of these into account. So customer benefit, let's look at them in turn. So ultimately, where we are regulated regional monopoly organizations, we need to consider both those customers who are trying to connect onto our network as new customers, and also those customers who are already connected. Everyone in the UK almost will have either an electricity connection or a gas connection, or both, to one of our networks. And so we need to ensure that all of the innovation that we do has a good return on investment to them, because ultimately we're investing their money, our money, in the innovation that we do. And so if we can't see a route to that investment, to that return, either in terms of a cash benefit or in terms of an improved safety or environmental impact, then we shouldn't be doing that innovation. And so that is a test that any of us as a network will apply to a potential project, and something that we will all consider. Collaboration. Ultimately, no one can do all of the innovation on their own. We know that we need to work across the networks, but also across the whole industry in terms of consultants, manufacturers, suppliers, energy supply companies, customer groups, small and medium-sized enterprises, anyone. We should all be working together to do this innovation. And so if you look at the innovation projects that we do, you'll find that pretty much every innovation project is working between a network and another organization. And the vast majority of the innovations of investment through the innovation stimulus goes to organizations that are not the networks. And hopefully you will also see that as we meet together as the electricity innovation managers and as a gas innovation governance group, that we are sharing these ideas and these projects between each other to make sure that we are working together to ensure that the learning that we generate within one organization benefits another. And so that we don't unnecessarily duplicate work and don't handle the money inefficiently. The third of the principles is carbon impact. Net zero is a theme, a specific focus for projects, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but we should consider in all of our innovation projects whether their focus is on health and safety, or on customer engagement, or on or specifically on the road to net zero. We need to consider the impact on the environment that each of those projects have. And for some of those projects, it may be a conscious decision that it actually increases our carbon footprint as an operational organization, but has significant other benefits. And we make that decision consciously, but it is something that we should consider across all of our work. And where possible, we should ensure that everything that we do reduces the carbon footprint of our businesses, and reduces our impact on the environment and the world around us. The fourth principle is data, and the outputs and the learning that we produce from our projects. The Smarter Networks portal, although I will admit it is a little bit outdated in terms of website design and functionality at the moment, it's a great repository of the work that we've done over the years. And behind many of those projects listed there is more information available. And so we are keen, as all of our organizations, and as I've said as a principle for our innovation, that we should share the data that we can openly with as many people as we can to deliver benefit to the wider community, both here in GB, the UK, but also more widely afield. And so if there is information that you want as a result of a project that's been done, please ask the networks involved, and if they can, they will share it with you. But I will say that there is some information that cannot be shared for reasons of confidentiality, both commercial and from a personal data point of view. And there are some things that can't be provided for technical sensitivities. And if you're working with us, then you will appreciate some of those, that actually, as we innovate with you, we will share what we can to both the wider network community, but also the world. But you will be clearly aware there are some things that you will not want us to share to protect your commercial advantage as an organization. The final principle that should apply to all of our innovation projects is scale up and roll out. Actually, we shouldn't be doing anything where we can't see a clear route to how it is deployed as business as usual within our organizations, because ultimately we know that is where innovation makes a difference. It's not just the proof of concept, the trial, the demonstration, but it's actually taking things out to our business and then rolling it out where the real benefit to our customers and where the real change can occur. And so if we can't see a route to that on an innovation project, we shouldn't be doing it. Those in summary are the overarching themes and principles that apply to all of our innovation activity that we do. And there's a little bit more detail on all of those within the innovation strategy documents. I'd like to talk next about one of the themes in detail. So one of the key themes for us, for both gas and electricity, is net zero and the energy system transition. How do we, as network organizations, ensure that we support our country's journey towards net zero, as we've committed to in the UK by 2050? Perhaps unsurprisingly, this was the most popular theme within the consultation, and also the one that gained the strongest support. And what you can see on the slide here is a summary of some of the information that you'll be able to see in the detail document for each of the strategies on the themes. So a view both on what you, our stakeholders, have said to help us shape those themes in terms of how important they are, number of people who support that. There's also the focus areas that will underpin that theme, to give a little bit more detail in terms of what we are looking at over the next few years in terms of innovation for both gas and electricity networks. And so specifically for net zero and the energy system transition, that is, how do we collaborate to ensure that emerging low carbon solutions can grow and can thrive within our ecosystem? How do we coordinate across the whole system in terms of doing cost benefit analysis and overall planning and operational approaches to enable some of the interactions that we can see will deliver a benefit in a net zero future? And how do we improve access to and visibility to the data about the availability, about what's going on, and how do we use some of that information to coordinate the operation of the energy system? So within the strategy, you'll see not only these focus areas, but also some case studies of projects that already have gone before, and a description of the theme and some discussion around that topic area and some of the things that we would consider as part of it. And I'm not going to talk you through that in detail, but I'll point you to take a look at the strategy documents after this session and have a read. And then if you've got questions, if you've got feedback, please put them through to us via the ENA, and we very gratefully receive that. Because one of the things that has been key to us is how we go on the journey of developing this innovation strategy, not just within ourselves, within the networks, but also with all of you, the wider energy sector community and our stakeholders. And John's going to talk you through the stakeholder journey that we followed in terms of developing these strategies.
Thanks, Ian. John Richardson here from SGN. I'm currently the chair of the Gas Innovation Governance Group. So going to talk you through the stakeholder engagement that we developed through the process. And at the ENA, and also when I mentioned the ENA, we're talking about the gas and the electricity networks within that. We believe that receiving wider input from industry and engagement with all stakeholders is crucial to shaping a successful and well-informed innovation strategy. We've seen that with the last strategy that we developed together, and we've actually incorporated some lessons learned within this process based on the last performance, which has been beneficial. As part of the development of the new strategy, we undertook extensive stakeholder engagement sessions. So there was two engagement stages. The first stage was an online consultation, which was conducted in November 2019. We pulled together some stakeholder feedback in relation to how we performed against our 2018 strategy, any potential or proposed content changes and suggestions, and any individual network innovation initiatives that should be reviewed or proposed. We then went round to some webinars and roundtable discussions. So there was 2 webinars conducted in November 2019 to gather further feedback on the proposed content of the new strategy. The roundtable session was conducted to raise awareness of the proposed content and to enable further discussions. Go to the next slide, Vivian, thanks. So the second stage of the engagement process, I would say this was more extensive engagement based on the outputs from the first stage. So we had 2 stakeholder workshops, one in Glasgow on the 16th of January, and then the following week we had a similar one in London on the 22nd of January. We felt that with some feedback from people who couldn't make the workshops in Glasgow and London, so we conducted as a secondary measure an additional webinar for those who couldn't make the Glasgow and London sessions. Then we went on to the strategy drafting. So the first draft was reviewed and finalised in January 2020. The second draft was developed and reviewed in February 2020, and then we finalised the strategy document and published it in March 2020. And again, the stakeholder engagement, you'll see in the next slides with some of the demographics that we've got based on sector and occupational, that it was quite wide ranging, and we had a lot of good input. And I guess the sort of the theme that we always use, whether it's internal engagement or external engagement, is people support what they help create. And we believe we've had a lot of good, valuable stakeholder engagement, both internally and externally, may I add, to the networks, which has really helped us develop and critique at the right stages. And we believe we've got a really good and sound innovation strategy going forward for the gas and electricity networks. So the stakeholder engagement, I won't go through these charts in any great detail, and this information should be available within the strategy documents, if not on the ENA website. But what it does show is the different, oh, I'll go back a sec, sorry Vivian. It does show that, you know, it was quite varied, the input that we had. I would say the demographics are slightly different based on those who could participate on the webinar, not anything significant against those that could participate in person. But again, as I said, you'll see from the colour key, there was quite a lot of different kinds of people from different occupational backgrounds and some from different sectors as well, which added a lot of value. Thanks, Vivian. And again, some of the examples here that we had, and some of the feedback on the left-hand side with the stakeholder engagement, and how we managed that feedback and how we used it to develop the strategy further, can be seen. And I won't go through every one here, but there's one or two here. So that if we take the first one, stakeholders do not find it easy to engage in innovation activities with network companies. And again, what we've done through the process was we reviewed and improved the engagement activities related to innovation. And again, we've done that throughout the engagement process for the strategy development. And we tried to make it as open as we could. So we had the webinars, we had the roundtable discussions, and we also have made it quite clear now where you can find the details behind the strategy, how it was developed. And even recently, you know, at the turn of the year, particularly the gas networks, we published a lot of this information within our individual business plans, which can all be found online from the networks. So another one, 75% felt that the gas and electricity strategies should be more closely aligned. Again, probably Ian mentioned it, with probably the most consulted theme in the new strategy was net zero in energy system transition. It's probably the biggest challenge that we've got as individual networks, but what I would say is we're more closely aligned than we've ever been within the gas networks and now the electricity networks as well, and we're working together. And what I'm hoping is that some of the case studies and project examples, so the second half of this session, will show that and present that. Just move on to the next one, Vivian.
Thank you, John. So one of the key things that we want to do today is to invite you to come and innovate with us, as well as taking you on as well as having had you on the journey to help develop the strategies. We want to invite you to innovate with us to deliver them, ultimately to deliver benefits to everyone across our customer base, but also to enable the net zero transition that we all see as valuable to our planet. And so that is set out clearly within the strategy, and hopefully all the information that you will need is there. But to show you a little bit of an example of the work that we've done so far with you, this slide specifically is on electricity, but within the transmission and system operator led projects, there's a portfolio of over 300 projects over the last few years, from 2008 through to 2019, and from the distribution led side, a similar volume, and that totals somewhere in the region of £942 million worth of work, which is a lot of work that's been done to test new technologies, to develop new ways of working, and ultimately to deliver benefits. And that benefit goes not only to the networks, which ultimately is then reflected in lower use of system charges and future price controls, but also directly to customers in terms of both the existing connected customers, but also to those who are trying to connect onto our network, enabling them to do so more quickly and at lower cost. And the data available for benefits from network innovation indicate that the benefit is somewhere around potentially 3 times that of the financial invested so far in terms of delivered benefits. But the opportunity is far greater. And actually the opportunity for us to roll out the technology that is developed across our networks is something that we are all committed to do within our current and future regulated price controls. And also we are improving the way we gather data and report to be able to show more clearly across all of this work what the value that does bring to our customers and stakeholders and the wider industry. And an equivalent volume of work has been done with the gas networks. And John, I'll let you talk through that on the next slide.
Yeah, so again, not to repeat myself, but our new gas innovation strategy, we clearly set out how we want to work with innovators on new solutions that can help us continue to deliver safe, resilient networks that facilitate the net zero transition and the needs of our customers. And what I would suggest, and then those that don't know about the Gas Innovation Governance Group, you know, we basically sit on a monthly basis, and we govern the innovation projects that are either new emerging projects or solutions. We also get to review in-flight projects, but probably most importantly, there's a bit of an emphasis on collaboration, and that's been developed, I would say, probably over the past 7 years. And what's helped us in that journey is the NIA Innovation Stimulus. And we'll see that there's an example later, the H21 project, which one of the networks will be presenting at the second half of this. There's a real collaborative approach with some of these real key challenges that we've got for net zero and the energy system transition. But that's not to say that we're dropping the ball with the day-to-day challenges that we've got. And probably from a gig perspective, one of the main examples of that has been recently with the COVID situation. And for those who don't know, one of the biggest programs that we've got running in the gas networks just now is the mains replacement program. And the challenge was, how can we get back to somewhere near business as usual with what's going on just now with the COVID-19. So we've actually set up a small project. We're working really closely to set up a working group, a steering group, and all of the gas networks are contributing to that. And the key thing there is there's no duplication. We're all working on the same problem. And within a short period of time, we've done an innovation sprint, and between the networks, we've actually come up with 4 key concepts. that should help us hopefully get back to some form of business as usual in the coming months. And we've not done that on our own. We're engaged with an SME, a new SME to the gas networks. And again, without the innovation stimulus, we probably wouldn't have the opportunity, one, to work together, and two, to introduce an SME that has probably not a great deal of experience within the gas network, but actually challenging us to think differently about the problems that we've got on a day-to-day basis. So the breakdown from the work that we've done so far in this price control period. So there's £265 million being invested, 536 projects. You can see the split between the distribution-led projects at 218 and the transmission-led projects at 47 million. That's further broken down with the two charts on the right-hand side, which shows the breakdown of the NIC projects against that of the NIA spend. And that's been between 2008 and 2019. And the focus for us just now is to introduce and fully engage with this new business strategy. But we've also got an eye on the price control period is changing from RIIO 1 to RIIO 2 in April. So there's a big emphasis within the group. How do we transition within that? Are we 100% sure that everyone's available, that everyone's aware of the work that's been done in RIIO 1 in this price control period? And to do that, we've introduced a few other things like the implementation log, the lessons learned log. We're also talking between gas and electricity networks about best practice as far as process is concerned. Not only do we review the technologies and the potential new solutions or techniques, but we also talk about best practice within the networks as far as process is concerned. And we believe that we're all really aligned and working together on this new strategy. And again, I mentioned it earlier, that can be seen online with the release of our first business plans for RIIO 2. So, and again, if there's any questions or if there's anyone is unsure of anything that we've been over, certainly today there's an opportunity next for a Q&A, which will be facilitated, I believe, by Matt and Randolph. Any questions? I've noticed there's some on Slido already. So if there's any questions or uncertainties, please, put them on Slido. Thanks.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you, Ian, as well. So as John's just said, we're on to the Q&A now, and we've got about 20 minutes for that. If you can go to slido.com and enter EIF6, as you can see on the left-hand side of the screen now, you can enter your questions for the panel there. This is also a two-way process, so we're going to make some polls live over the next 20 minutes as well. So you can give us some feedback on what you've heard that way, as well as by asking questions. The first of those polls is around which of the 5 innovation themes that you've just heard about and hopefully had already seen in our strategies is of most interest to you. So I can see some votes starting to come in there already. So as we gather that feedback and looking at the questions which have already come in, so a first one from Professor Ron Loveland asks, all have signed up to net zero, but the key question is what pace of transition is practicable? So how is that key issue being incorporated in to the ENA innovation strategies? And I think there's it's clearly a central issue for innovation, as Ian and John have described. And you could see in the way that we've developed the strategies how the network innovation objectives, including delivering an environmentally sustainable network, then flow through into the principles and into the shared network innovation themes. And of course, these questions also go much more wide than simply network innovation. They also touch on investment and the shape of the networks more generally, but innovation plays an absolutely crucial role in understanding how we can deliver our part of the net zero journey, and particularly issues like how we can manage connections of low carbon technologies to both the gas and electricity networks. Clearly, it's also important thinking towards the next price control, both in terms of innovation and networks more generally. So, John, I wonder if you'd like to comment on that, how we incorporate the sort of pace of the transition required and stepping up to that challenge, and what you'd like to see based on the comments you were just making around RIIO-2 business plans.
Yeah, well, I think it's quite clear, certainly within the business plans and also to the stakeholder engagement with the development of the new strategy, Matt. And it's quite clearly defined within our business plans for RIIO-2. Certainly, I know the gas and electricity networks are slightly different, but we released our first draft of the business plans in December last year. And what we've done is we've developed a roadmap. It is a challenge. The 2045, I think, is the key dates for us as far as the legislation change, and we've clearly defined that within our business plans. The one thing that I would say is, though, we're using lessons learned from previous innovation projects, and I would say that that's true for both the gas and the electricity networks. The examples that I would give from the gas perspective was of the opening up the gas market, which was the Open project, whereby we challenged the value of gas, and there was some challenges there on the index, and the specification of gas coming into the gas network in the UK was challenged within that process. And basis of the roadmap that when we're looking at these hydrogen projects, and my colleagues in SGN across the other networks are working closely together on H21, H100. There's a number of projects that we're doing together, but these are similar challenges that we've seen previously, obviously a different scale. The other one that I would point to is all of the networks are now injecting and introducing biomethane into the networks. There was similar challenges there when we were looking at gas specification and how that could be done efficiently with no detrimental effect to any of our customers or key stakeholders. And certainly, I don't want to put words in Ian's mouth by any means, but there's a lot of renewable energy coming from the electricity side as well, which has brought, and I would suggest has helped the electricity networks on their journey towards net zero.
Well, that's a perfect point to bring Ian in, and I wonder, Ian, if as well as commenting on that, you might like to also pick up on the question that's been asked around assessing the benefits of projects which facilitate progress towards net zero, particularly when those benefits don't fall directly on network customers. So how do we bring in that kind of wider assessment of benefit in the net zero context?
Sure, Matt, thank you, and thank you, John. I think we, in part, as a regulated business en masse and at scale, which is what we need if we want to make the progress that's needed towards net zero, we have to deal with the problems that that are in front of us, unless our regulatory settlement specifically says otherwise. And so where from electricity we've seen significant uptakes in renewable generation, we've innovated in terms of the technology and the commercial relationships particularly for flexibility and for active network management, and to enable those assets to get connected at lower cost and more quickly, to be able to deliver their low carbon energy into the system. And because we're in a slightly different place in the price control journey to gas, a lot of what we are doing is innovating to develop solutions and tools that we can put into a toolkit to be able to say, as we track the different elements of the net zero transition, as we track the decarbonisation of heating and the decarbonisation of transport, we know that we've got a tool set available to us that can help us to keep the lights on and keep customers warm at lowest cost to the customer as that comes. But you're right, Ron, in terms of the question, the pace does need to increase, and that increase needs to be led by government, and then reflected in terms of the price controls that are delivered to us through Ofgem to enable us to do more work at scale, to enable us to be more proactive in terms of investing to support support that transition. And that's where the real scale of the movement will come, and so we're looking forward to that hopefully in the next price controls. In terms of benefits and projects that specifically benefit people that are outside of the networks, is a very difficult question, because the key funding that is available to us in terms of the innovation stimulus has some constraints on it in terms of being set there for projects that have what's termed a direct impact on the network. And so we have to be able to assess what impact it is the change or the improvement or the benefit to those customers is going to have, and whether that has a sufficient benefit to enable us to be able to invest in the project, which is a little bit complicated, and so stops us from doing some things such as innovating to develop new technologies that are, I'll say, customer side of the meter as opposed to the network side of the meter. But actually we do a lot of work working with customers and with manufacturers who've developed those technologies to be able to say how much of an impact does it have on our network, and actually how do we verify that benefit and how it can be used. And so there's a lot that we do there, and within the remit that we've got, I think well, I was going to say we do as much as we can, but actually no, we can always do more. There's always the opportunity to do more, but we have to be careful around the governance requirements of that innovation stimulus as set by Ofgem. We and other networks, speaking as UKPN, are involved in a number of projects that are funded by Innovate UK or other means, which don't have the same governance requirements and have a much wider remit. If you want to find out more about those funding mechanisms, I'll point you towards the Energy Innovation Centre funding finder, which will hopefully be quite useful to you in that regard.
Thank you both. And you can see in the results of the first poll the importance of net zero coming out, just as it did in our engagement around the development of the strategies. The new poll on the screen now talks to how important the innovation funding is specifically to achieving net zero. And again, you can see that coming out quite strongly. I think you've also touched, Ian, there on the question we had around the connection between ENA, the Energy Innovation Centre, who a lot of the networks work with as well. I'd like to move to the question about data access, which was something that Ian mentioned in his presentation. And the question from Paul Fjellrad is, where can data access requests by consultants seeking to propose innovations to energy network organisations be made, whether that's metadata or samples? I'm going to invite Randolph to come in here to talk a little bit about ENA's wider data work and data triage process, and then Ian, you may wish to comment as well.
Thanks. Other question that's just popped up on open data as well, which is good. So last year, as some of you will probably know, the government launched an energy data task force report, which made 5 key recommendations for energy data going forward. That included one recommendation on data being presumed open. So as a result of this task force, we set up a new working group at ENA, focusing on data and digitalisation. And again, that sits across all of our electricity and gas members. And the key role of that group is to help deliver those recommendations from that task force. So we very much endorse those recommendations, and we're undertaking a range of different products or outputs that can help deliver them. So specifically in terms of Paul's question on requests and access, so in terms of existing projects and data and outputs from them, they're all available in the Smarter Networks portal. And as Ian said, that's getting a bit of a facelift, so it'll be easier to understand where the outputs are and how you can download them during the next iteration of that. In terms of requests for data, at the moment, most of the requests go to the individual networks, but what we're looking at doing under the data working group at ENA is creating an ENA-wide data triage process. So what this means is that people can submit their requests for data either directly to the networks or to ENA, and then there'll be an agreed process for how and if we can make that data available. Specifically for innovation projects, we would use the Smarter Networks portal for that sort of data. But in terms of wider data requests, we will be looking at developing a digital systems map with industry and government, and hopefully a lot of it will be made via that map as well. So I will direct you guys to our YouTube video that we recently launched on data, and specifically how we're making it available via a sort of mapping function. I like to call it a Google Earth of energy. So I think that answers those 2 questions, Matt.
Thanks, Randolph. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on to the next poll, which is around third-party involvement in network innovation projects, and whether you, as participants in this, would like to see stronger third-party involvement. There's a couple of questions which have come up, which are relevant here as well. One of which is around blockers on collaboration between electricity and gas networks, and how stakeholders and third parties, consumers can assist in tackling those blocks. And there's also a specific question around the mechanism for feedback on ideas that are submitted to the networks, particularly through the NIC process. John, I mean, you commented on the strengthening and the increase in collaboration across electricity and gas in your part of the presentation. Would you like to speak to that question on blockers, and particularly how third parties can help overcome them?
Yeah, no, that, as I mentioned earlier, it's taken us a bit of time, certainly through this price control, but we're now starting to start and having a real collaborative approach. What's probably helped is actually working together, the gas and the electricity networks. All the work that's been done in these joint strategies has been done together, even the workshops, the stakeholder engagement workshops that we held in Glasgow and London were joint workshops. The webinars were all joint. We're now also sitting on a monthly basis. So we sit in GIG and EIM respectively and separately, but we also have a joint meeting which was introduced just before we kicked off this strategy review and relaunch. I think that those are getting stronger. Ian mentioned earlier there's some work being done, but there's also a lot of good work that's going on with the Innovate UK funding stimulus as well. There's a lot of joint collaborative, and they aren't just joint in the fact that they're done between gas and electricity networks, but we're also starting to introduce SMEs from the electricity network into the gas network and vice versa. The one thing that I would say is I think we're overcoming the barriers. The innovation strategies are now aligned. We're in communication more often, and it's been quite useful having those meetings. I would say that one of the challenges that we've got to maintain that is having a form of innovation funding stimulus. And I think the way that the NIA and NIC stimulus is set up, it actually promotes collaboration and it allows us to look at projects that have been done by other networks and also get the benefit out of those projects. And to get the benefit fully, we need to be engaged, we need to be in communication, we need to be meeting with each other regularly. There needs to be an understanding of what both sets of networks are working on, what our key challenges are. And I think we're actually at a good stage just now, but we've got the draft determination coming next month from Ofgem, which we're all quite keen to see what the makeup of the innovation stimulus will be next year. But we are hopeful that we can maintain links and working together. And for access from third parties, I think one of the challenges has been before I joined the networks, I was an SME I was part of an SME trying to win work from the networks. And it was always actually quite difficult to understand what the key challenges were from a network perspective and get those key contacts that you as a third party or an SME could actually pitch comfortably. Again, I go back to it, certainly within this price control period, we've enhanced the number of SMEs that have now got access to the networks. One of the key driving forces of certainly the NIA funding is that it would introduce
fear we may have lost John mid-flow there, so I'm going to go across to Ian to add any further reflections on that, and also on one specific question which has come from Dave Richardson. Apologies, John, we lost you a little bit there, so I'm just going to go to Ian, both on any reflections on those points and on Dave Richardson's question, which was addressed to you on how collaboration between networks and license suppliers happens to trial behind the meter innovation, and particularly whether governance and access can be improved.
So, in terms of within the networks, both electricity and gas, it's improving, is what I will say, and having a joint innovation stimulus is really helpful to enable that. I think without that stimulus, where we are purely drive to compete, you would definitely not see the same level of collaboration. And that stimulus does also help lower the bar to entry for third parties. So I think with the poll that's still on the screen, I'll say actually kind of everyone obviously would like to see more people involved, but actually if you think it's kind of okay, a 3 is a good score on that, to say that actually we do have a lot of third parties involved in almost every project in aggregate. over 75% of the spend on all of our innovation projects or portfolios goes to third parties. So it's 3/4 of what we do in terms of the investment is done through third parties. So obviously we can always do more, but there's a lot of good stuff. In terms of collaboration with suppliers, a lot happens. We're at UKPN, we're running several projects with energy suppliers, and I know that some of the other electricity networks are as well. I can't speak personally for the gas networks, and there is money available, but ultimately the energy supply market is purely competitive, and so if you make an innovation there, you have more opportunity to maintain to stay ahead in the market, unlike getting the reset that we see within the regulated networks. Could the governance be improved? Of course, and but there are arrangements in place to be able to support that already. So certainly open to any ideas, David, that you or others have got in terms of suggestions for what we can do. When the draft determination comes out in July for RIIO-2, hopefully there'll be a little bit of information there on the RIIO-2 innovation stimulus, and welcome feedback directly to Ofgem in terms of where you think there can be improvements on what's currently around.
Thanks very much, Ian. And I haven't been ignoring Kelly Greer's question from ADE, which talks about the number of amazing innovation projects. Always good to get a bit of feedback along those lines. But noting that unless you work in the area or involved, it's difficult to understand what's happening. The innovation strategies and events like this are clearly part of what we're trying to do to make sure that we are disseminating, engaging, and we're considering, as Randolph said, how we can build on what we already do later this year. We've also got a specific poll which I've made live now on what ways of increasing engagement would be most useful for you. So I'm going to leave that poll running while we have a quick coffee break. Please do give us feedback there. Please do continue to give us feedback or ask questions in the audience Q&A on Slido. We'll make sure that we've gone through all those questions properly and picked up anything that we haven't had time for today. So thank you very much for those contributions. It really is very much appreciated. We'll take just under 10 minutes now for that comfort break, and we will recommence at 10:25. We've got 3 presentations on specific innovation projects, starting with H21. But thank you all for the questions, and thank you to Ian, John, and Randolph for joining me on the presentations this morning. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. I hope the queues at the kettle weren't as bad as they often are at the coffee machines at ENA when we host physical events like this. So, as we said, we've got 3 presentations now, doing a bit of a deeper dive into some of the innovation projects which are supporting the delivery of net zero. We're going to start with H21 and Keith Owen, Head of Systems Development and Energy Strategy from Northern Gas Networks, is here to present the project and how it's contributing to the overall vision for decarbonisation and net zero gas networks. Over to Keith.
Thanks, Matt. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, as Matt's laid out there, I think it's important. We've had some great talks this morning looking at the innovation process, what across industry we do, and how we roll that out. And what I plan to do is just focus on a little bit on the long-term strategic approach that the gas industry taking, and then do a bit of a deeper dive into some of the projects with a particular focus on the H21 project. So if you can move to the next slide, please. Really important to flag this straight away. You know, for some time, industry perhaps worked slightly in isolation of one another, all thinking great things, all doing some really useful work, but perhaps not collaborating in a way that would really be productive in terms of the transition to net zero and the enormous challenge that certainly faces gas in terms of the heat sector, but equally so across the energy vectors. So last year there was a piece of work undertaken, Pathways, which was looking at how we might transition our industry, what the impacts of that would be, how that would affect what we do, how that would impact customers and so on. And that resulted in a further piece of work which is now in play called Gas Goes Green, which was launched just recently. And this is a comprehensive collaboration right across our industry to deliver sort of six key areas. So there's the first one, investing in net zero. So in terms of the transition process, how might we do that? What are the right investments to make? When are the right times to make those investments, and so on? We're also looking at the gas quality and safety, another work stream. And that's really understanding how we can enable low carbon and green gases onto what is dominated by fossil methane, a network dominated by fossil methane at the moment. We're looking at consumer options, so that's really starting to understand the impact that the work that we do to decarbonise will have on customers, both domestic, commercial, industrial, right across that portfolio, and work really closely with those customers to understand how we do the right thing and enable a fair transition for everyone. The next work package is all about system enhancement. So how do we optimise our gas network? We've seen some great things happening across on our electricity colleagues' systems in terms of smart grids and so on. And we think there's a lot of learning to be developed there to enable a much more efficient, metric-dense gas infrastructure that will really help us to deliver a net zero position more cost effectively in a manner which is better for customers. Hydrogen transformation is clearly a major strand of activity, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And then the final one is all about communications and stakeholder, because it's no point doing all of this work, transitioning our system and so forth, if we don't bring customers along on that journey, if we don't inform accurately and provide them with the information that they need to make the right choices for them. And again, irrespective of whether they're domestic, commercial or industrial. So if you move to the next slide, please. Part of the work that we did through Pathways, and it follows on into Gas Goes Green, was to really project forward to 2050 our thoughts around the analysis of how we get there, and in terms of what that might look like for gas demand, throughput on our system. And what you see there is a graphic which shows a gradual decline in the conveyance of natural gas, and equally a gradual increase in green gases hitting the system through to 2050. I should say, as a health warning around this, naturally there's quite a significant amount of uncertainty the further out you go, because much of it is dependent on policy decisions, is dependent on technology advancements and so forth. So nonetheless, it's our lottery winning guess, as it were, as to how we might transition, how we might move things forward. And I think it's useful to have that as a backdrop to the work that we do in Gas Goes Green, to constantly reference back to that and understand, are we hitting those targets? Are we seeing things which change our view of how we get to 2050 in terms of that speed of response? Can we deliver more in a more accelerated manner than just aiming for 2050? Would it take longer, and so on and so forth? So that's a little bit about the pathway. If you can move to the next slide, I'll just talk around some of the innovation projects that are in play across GB at the moment. I'll not touch on H21 because I've got a series of slides on that coming shortly, but really focusing on the projects led by the other networks in the country. So a high NTS, major piece of work from our colleagues at National Grid, looking at how the conveyance of hydrogen through the national transmission system could be undertaken. What are the issues in delivering that, both in terms of the material aspects on the transmission system itself, the operability of the transmission system, and indeed the impacts on customers and so forth. So there's a number of different strands of work within high NTS, feasibility, Project Cavendish, hydrogen blending, and so forth, which gives you an idea of the importance and the significance this transition to hydrogen has on the national transmission system. Indeed, has for all of the distribution networks which depend on the NTS for gas supply to our customers. So a really important piece of work there, and I can't stress enough how collaborating with our colleagues in national really allows us to share the learning, understand where the challenges are, and also that's a two-way street. So because of the pressure systems they're operating at are similar to some of the pressure systems on our networks, there's a real opportunity there to leverage some of the work they're doing into distribution thinking. Then we've got H100, and that's a piece through Scotia Gas Networks. Really important, again, this strategic vision that they have. And again, within that programme, a number of different significant projects, such as the Aberdeen Vision Littletoon. And I suppose of note, just recently announced their East Fife project, which is looking to, for the first time, deliver 100% hydrogen to I think it's 300 customers or so up in that part of Scotland, and that's a really insightful piece. Really starts to understand what are the issues in doing that, how does the customer respond to that, what are the varied impacts that might be discovered along the way. So really good that SGN are working on that, and again, that the learning from all of these projects cross-fertilize to all of the different strands of activity. If you got the next slide, please. So in play right now is High Deploy. So those not familiar with High Deploy, whereas the other projects I've spoken of are looking at 100% deployment of hydrogen. High Deploy is a blended solution. So that's live at Keele University right now, blending up to 20% hydrogen by volume in the gas infrastructure there. And a really successful outcome, seeing some positive results in terms of zero impact on appliances and so forth. Excuse me. So an important step on the decarbonisation pathway, which allows quick deployment to deliver a 6% carbon reduction in the gas industry across all of the customer base. And that can be put in place quite readily. It links in from a whole systems perspective to the opportunity for GB flexibility for our power colleagues. So it's a really positive step. HyDeploy 2 is also active, so that's taking the learning from Kiel to our Integral site over in Winlaton. For those that aren't familiar, Integrals are integrated transport electricity gas research lab, looking at how we develop a whole systems view, demonstrating at scale various projects, and the HyDeploy sits within that. And that's again an important next step in the blending process or the blending pathway, because whereas Kiel's a private gas network for the university campus, HyDeploy 2 is on an open NGN gas network. So, if you like, real world gas customers, not a campus situation at all, brings a whole different breed of challenge. So again, another important step for our industry. HyNet, just very quickly, is an industrial vision piece for the Northwest, really important. It's part of a number of industrial cluster programs to decarbonize. And that's looking at how we can leverage the industrial capability there to deliver more hydrogen, take some of the industries off fossil gas, develop the carbon capture and the green hydrogen production in a holistic way, so that can then lead the charge for penetration of transport and the domestic setting. So again, another inspirational project brought about through Cadent and partners, which is really starting to get traction now. So exciting times. And then finally, just to touch on some broader issues, I suppose, as we transition to greener gases, that changes the gas composition, changes the billing regime, or impacts the billing regime. So there's been a piece of work ongoing for a while now, looking at a future billing methodology to account for all of these changes and impacts, so that as we transition, customers can still be confident that what they are paying for is what they've actually used. So that's a quick sprint through some of the projects. I'll quickly now go on to in more detail onto H21. If you go to the next slide, please. So for those aren't familiar with the H21 program, which has been around now for 2 or 3 years or so, NIC funded program of work, really terrific that we've been able to get this delivered through that process. And it's looking to convey 100% hydrogen in existing gas networks. So it's really about the repurposing of existing infrastructure to maximize the value and to ease the transition process. So that's the key fundamental of H21. If you go up the and just before I move off there, if you want more on H21, then please do visit the website. There's lots of information on there and various films telling you about in detail about the progress that's been made. If you go to the next slide, please. So in brief, so the first phase of work, which is drawing to a close now, was based across 2 sites, both the Health and Safety Science Division in Derbyshire and also the DMVGL facility in Spade Adam over in Cumbria. And in broad terms, the Health and Safety Lab facility is looking at leakage, understanding the delta between conveyance of natural gas through existing pipe assets, and then what that looks like if you do the same with pure hydrogen. And that's being done on components that have been harvested from across the UK. So as pipelines and other pieces of equipment have been subject to a replacement activity, the H21 team have stepped in order to harvest that and maintain the least cost delivery of test asset to the site. That speaks, I think, volumes to this project being very much a one of collaboration. So whilst it's led by Northern Gas, it's very much at the heart of what Cadent, SGN and our colleagues in Wales and the West are all about, which is how do we decarbonise our existing infrastructure. So that just wouldn't have worked if that collaboration hadn't been achieved. Over in Cumbria, DMV team who've constructed that test house you see there, that's all about once a leak occurs, what are the consequences? And again, a lot of this activity is a replay of what happened when we transitioned from town gas to natural gas. It's really understanding the differences, behavioural characteristics of different gases, and playing those out in terms of a gas network. So if you go to the next slide, please. Really important part of the overall H21 work was to understand what the change in quantitative risk assessment would be if we transition to 100% hydrogen instead of natural gas. And the QRA model has been built up over many, many years as a consequence, again, moving from town's gas to natural gas, really understanding what is the quantified risk of a certain activity, of a certain installation, and so on. And that's served us as an industry extremely well to deliver a real high standard of safety and a quality system so that customers of all types can be confident in. But in moving to hydrogen, we need to understand what the impacts of that QRA position would be. And that's, again, a piece of work that's been undertaken. It's very much predicated on sophisticated statistical modelling techniques. I can't begin to speak to that. It's well beyond my mathematical capabilities. But nonetheless, that process has been undertaken to understand what the delta is between the two. And again, we hope to see the outputs of that. As for the other pieces of work around about August, there's been a slight impact with the COVID-19, which has pushed everything back a little bit. But yes, that's a piece of work that's ongoing right now. If you move to the next slide, please. Really important, we're talking about transitioning not just our gas infrastructure, we're talking about transitioning anything that is connected to our system from natural gas to hydrogen. That talks about impact, its cost, its the safety elements, and so on and so forth. All of those issues are wrapped up. So the social sciences work that we've been undertaking with Leeds Beckett University is a really fundamental piece of work to understand where the issues will be, what our stakeholders are saying about this, what level of understanding they have of climate change and the overall energy transition, and the need to understand there isn't a do nothing option. We have to move away from natural gas, whatever that solution is. So this is a piece of work that's been undertaken over a number of years now, building up the knowledge, building up our level of understanding. And what you see on the screen there, some general results that we had a few months ago to the thought about, well, okay, what does hydrogen mean to you? Really interesting aspect to this. Whilst we as conservative gas folks thought, well, surely safety is going to be the kind of #1 concern, that really didn't come across as we spoke through the work that we're doing, the work with science division at Health and Safety Labs and DMV, GL, etc. What came across was they're really concerned about impact in their home. What does it mean to, what sort of level of disruption am I going to have, and what's it going to cost me? So those are really powerful insights, and it's a piece of work that we very, very keen to continue. If you go to the next slide, please. In continuing, we've now just kicked off phase 2 of the H21 program. Again, this is an NIC funded piece of work. We're delighted to have a successful outcome just last year. And again, this is starting to move away from the asset testing that we've been doing at the Health and Safety Labs and at DMVGL, and really starting to think about the network impact. So it's that aggregated position. How does a network respond when we transition across to hydrogen? So it's a fundamental shift. So if you go to the next slide, please, I'll talk a little through that just in brief. So part of what we're trying to understand is in moving across, clearly we have many procedures and processes that have been built up over decades really, that keep our customers safe, keep our gas operatives safe, and make sure that we're doing things to the highest standards. That's for natural gas. Clearly, in moving to hydrogen, different family of gas, different behavioral characteristics, we need to understand what those changes are. Do the tools, the techniques that we currently deploy in the highways and byways, are they still applicable when we transition to hydrogen? So in order to understand that, we need to create a sandbox environment. So to that end, this project is leveraging the previous investment made at Spade Adam through the phase 1 activity to build a microgas grid, where we can play all sorts of tunes with that, put it under all sorts of different stress situations, and then apply our existing process and understand where gaps might appear to help us understand what modifications will be needed. So really important piece of work. Move to the next slide, please. In line with that, and I guess in parallel too, the other element of this, whilst we've tested individual assets, what we really don't have a good feel for is what is the performance of those similar types of assets in undisturbed ground. Remember, the assets that have been tested at Buxton have been dug up out the ground. The protections that they've had in terms of soil and clay that have been around them have been removed. They've been on the back of a wagon, so they're subject to vibration and so forth. None of that is really representative of a real gas network. So I think it's important that an unoccupied trial is undertaken, and we've been successful in securing a facility over in Redcar, which is in Teesside, which is an undisturbed piece of gas network. It was a former housing estate that's subsequently been removed, but the gas network remains untouched. So it's an ideal location to carry out some unoccupied field trials and really understand fully the impact of conveyance of hydrogen in existing infrastructure. If you go to the next slide, please. I'll briefly touch on this. Again, it's moving the QRA forward, and whilst the QRA that's been developed in phase 1 is looking at the network aspects, through the government-funded High for Heat programme, there's been a separate QRA developed for the quantified risk beyond the meter. So it's really important to combine those two things so that what we get is an aggregated QRA that goes all the way from the network to the burner. And in doing so, what we create is an industry-ready quantitative risk assessment that will help us understand where the challenges are, what modifications might be needed in order that we can deliver a safety standard that is at least as safe as we've got now, if not better. Move to the next slide, please. Again, phase 2, mentioned it earlier when I was talking through phase 1, we'll be expanding on the social sciences. And that's really about enhancing all of the material that we've got so far to understand what sort of material might need to be developed in order that the customers can really understand choice, can understand the impacts on them, and pull together in a language that is readily accessible, irrespective of vulnerability or so on. So again, really important that we keep on with this to bring customers with us. Next slide, please. And then briefly, just quick skip through, we've got a couple of slides here just to more or less to close out. It's important to note that whilst we've got these, if you like, these project juggernauts that are funded through the NIC process, in order to proceed smoothly, in order to support those major pieces of work, there are much smaller elements through the NIA process that just step in and answer some really important questions that allow the project to proceed at pace and deliver quality output. So what we got there is a couple of examples. We've carried out a collaborative piece with the other networks, distribution networks, looking at what a conversion would look like for 9 major urban centres, so like Manchester and Newcastle, these major cities. Understand how the network will perform and so on and so forth. And as that says there, that's due to be released in 2020. So it's really important that we can model that and understand it to help shape our thinking. And then the next one down, that really reflects on the field trials and understanding what we're doing at Spade Adam. What does that design look like? How do we manage the field trial process over in Teesside? So that helps us give background to that NIC investment and make sure we deliver appropriately. And then next slide, just a sprint through. So innovation to come. I'll not go into detail with those. That just gives you an example of some of the thinking that has gone into supporting that phase 2 H21 work. And all of those things that you see listed there help us just turn the dial a little bit further and make sure that that NIC delivers on target and delivers the outputs that we all want to see. And then finally, just to close out, because conscious of time, move to the next slide, please. So not directly related to H21 in some respects, but it just gives a view of industry thinking. One of the next smaller steps to take is to really start to understand what the wider market is doing, what supply chain's doing. And we've seen some great announcements from the likes of Baxi and Worcester Bosch of late talking about their hydrogen-ready boiler systems that they've created through the High Heat program and so on. So we're really keen, working with industry partners and the networks and so forth, to create a real-world demonstrator, bring to life, I suppose, the opportunity that hydrogen would bring for the wider public at a domestic level. And we, as you can see from that slide, we're going to be hoping to drop that into the Integral facility and collaborate with all of our industry partners to make that a real success. And I think simple little pieces of work like that will help bring to life the hydrogen story, because I'm conscious that it does get really heavily technical, as similar projects on the electricity side would. So being able to do something like this, bringing stakeholders in, having that conversation, it probably simplifies, I think, the narrative and makes it feel real for everyone. So with that, I'll close out and I'll take any questions you might have. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Keith. And you can continue to submit questions to all of the presenters on the Slido. So that's slido.com and enter the code EIF6. We've just got a couple of minutes and we've had one question on this so far, which is around terminology. Keith, should stakeholders in the UK switch from using natural gas to another term, such as extracted gas? I wonder if you might comment on, I mean, you've talked a little bit about stakeholder interactions, and I wonder if you might comment on kind of people's understanding of terminology, and particularly how we're going to help customers on that journey from the gas we use today to hydrogen.
Yeah, of course. It's a really good question, actually, and there have been many interesting debates with our network partners looking at this, trying to understand what might the term be, and that, to be fair, that goes to the heart of a great many things in terms of what's actually written to the statute books, how gas is described in legislation. Interestingly, it tends to just say gas, which is perhaps less helpful. And certainly, it's an area of concern that we need to be able to distinguish fossil-based gases from those which are considered green gases, biomethanes, green hydrogen, and so on. And then, of course, we've got the various coloured banded descriptions of hydrogen, from blue, grey, green, and goodness knows what else. So you're absolutely right to highlight that. It is an area of focus to understand what the right language will be. I don't necessarily have all the right answers. I think the challenge in terms of that customer conversation is natural gas has been used as a term for so long now in the UK, or indeed just straightforward gas at a customer level, that it's kind of tricky to overcome that. I think the the direction is probably that we maybe have to leave that bit alone and work with customers to educate them that natural gas is coming out the ground from fossil sources, and develop similar sorts of phraseology to describe low carbon gases and hydrogen, but I don't really have the answers to that right now, unfortunately.
Thanks, Keith. We're bang on time, so there are a few more questions coming in, but I suggest if you continue to ask questions, we'll answer those after the event. We'll wrap up questions from the earlier session and anything from the presentations. So thank you very much, Keith. We're going to move on now to a topic which came up a couple of times in the earlier Q&A, which is data, and particularly the move to open data, and learn a bit more about one of the innovation projects that's addressing exactly that question, which is WPD's presumed open data. We're joined by Sam Rossi-Ashton, who's Innovation and Low Carbon Networks Engineer at WPD, and over to you, Sam.
Thank you, Matt. Can you hear me?
Yep, all good.
Good. Okay, thank you. So yes, next slide, please. Okay, so this is the agenda for today. I'm just going to briefly touch on what open data is, and then discuss a project that WPD has been pursuing for the last 6 months or so, and then talk about the next steps and how you can get involved at the end. Next slide, please. So in summary, it's an NIA-funded project from January to January, so relatively short in project terms, with a budget of 580k, and with 3 partners. Well, there's us as the primary partner, and then we've got 2 delivery partners working on the project with Western Power Distribution, the first of which is Energy Systems Catapult, who is looking at openness and data processing activity, and the Centre for Sustainable Energy, who is concerned more with external engagement and web development. And at this point, I should probably also apologise for the lack of royalty-free stock images for data. So there are some peculiar images throughout the presentation, but such is life. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So the scope of the project, as Randolph already mentioned, the way in which it works is that the Energy Data Task Force produced a digitalised energy system report, I think about this time last year, perhaps a bit later. Within that report, there are 5 recommendations how to realise the most benefit from a digitalised energy system. Of those 5 recommendations, it was felt that 3 of them are perhaps better suited to be delivered by government, regulators, or associations such as ENA, but 2 of them relatively easy to deliver as a network operator or network operators. So those are the 2 that this project is focusing on. The first of which is the visibility of data. So this is the extent that we have lots of data, but perhaps people aren't aware that we hold it, and so it's ensuring that people are aware of that. And then once that data is visible, maximising the value primarily to third parties, and that's really done by ensuring the data is discoverable, searchable, and understandable. Next slide, please. Thank you. So presumed open data as a principle. I mean, rather than the status quo where data is held by an organisation that creates it unless challenged by another organisation, this is more a principle where it's presumed that data is shareable in the first instance, and so data is considered available to be shared unless there are things standing in the way. This doesn't mean that all data is going to end up available to everyone. It's really a case of establishing it as open and then considering sensitivities such as commercial issues or GDPR issues that stand in the way, and then de-escalating its openness as a consequence of that assessment. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So benefits of open data and benefits this project looks to achieve. I mean, to some extent, this project is looking to identify the benefits that open data can bring with the use case development that I'll discuss in a second. but as a broad perspective, some of the things we expect more data openness to achieve are the optimization of LCT deployment, which obviously entails decarbonisation or faster decarbonisation, the increase in deployment of decentralized generators, which could potentially reduce bills, optimize the procurement of network assets, which reduces network costs potentially, and increasing flexible revenue opportunities, or identifying when new participants can take place in new opportunities. Next slides, please. So in terms of openness, there are 4 classifications proposed within the Energy Data Task Force digitalisation reports. The first of which is open, which I've said is where all data is available to everyone. The second of which is public. This is where data is available, but there are some restrictions on usage. So for instance, you might be required to sign an agreement about how you process that data, or how it's treated, or how it's kept if you want to download it. The third of which is shared, where somewhat similar to public, but it may only be available to specific types of stakeholders, stakeholders that don't have any issues, commercial issues of sharing that data with them. And then closed is to be kind of data that's considered sensitive, and so it's to be kept within WPD's estate only. And in practice, whilst these are the classifications in the report, there are some complexities around, well, specifically the shared and closed classifications that potentially require an additional degree of granularity to ensure that it's treated correctly. So in terms of the project, obviously the first 3 are the ones that are relevant to external stakeholders. So those are the ones that we're going to review. I think there's some internal activity within WPD looking at how we can better classify closed data, but more internal activity than within the project. Next slide, please. So the method for the project itself is relatively simple. We've already completed phase 1, which was the identification of relevant data sets. So this is not only data that is already available or the public is aware of that WPD collects, but kind of create a data catalogue of all data that is potentially usable by third parties. Then hosted workshops to utilising the data collection to try and identify a number of use cases, how stakeholders want to use the data effectively. And then there's an openness assessment. There's a further development of this. I think Randolph alluded to the data working group having some activity in this area as well. So the idea is that there's a degree of work done within the report talking about how different issues can end up with different openness classifications. So the idea within the project is this is developed to the extent where it's kind of a more generic methodology, but more specific to network operators, whereby you can feed in a data set and then follow the assessment to give you an answer as to how that data can be shared, and also try and consider an appropriate means of access for the public and shared tiers of data openness. After that, we're looking to develop a hub. So we have WPD has an energy data hub that it hosts online at the moment, but that is kind of in response to the recommendations that we made already, but that acts as an interim solution wherein it's a signposting service to our existing data online and hosted and available data sets at the moment. So the idea within the project is to trial a solution where we're going to identify, place some data sets of high value on there, and kind of get things started into an era where data will be placed on there for all to use if it's considered open enough. And then lastly, a data science challenge, which I'll come on to a bit later. Next slide, please. So first work package, which we completed in Q1 of this year. Not loads to say on it. It's a data discovery phase, so there wasn't much specific learning relevant to stakeholders other than it's a lot of engagement with WPD data owners. Obviously, data is sprawled around such a large business, with lots of different owners, different types of data sets, and having these owners having different approaches to how they store and use their data. So it's kind of an activity to do that. And this started off via face-to-face meetings, and then obviously, given current affairs, turned into conference calls instead. All data sets were then documented into a data catalog. This is recording the metadata of the data sets rather than the repository for the data sets themselves. And the idea is that this, whilst it's it's created in Work Package 1, but it exists as a dynamic document throughout the project, and then it will be utilized for the publication of the hub towards the end. And so far, within Work Package 1 and a little bit of extra work up until now, we have 100 recorded data sets there with metadata from all around the business, all of which we believe to be potentially of use to third parties and stakeholders, but we haven't run the openness assessment on them yet, so we haven't really haven't published the data catalogue. Next slide, please. So what we've been working on up until now is Work Package 2. It's coming to a close next week. And so this is to develop the use cases. And this has gone really well. The way in which we've done this is to hold 4 workshops, two internal within WPD and 2 external. And the internal ones were to bring together all these data users that we identified in Work Package 1 and to start a conversation between all of them. To kind of promote sharing of how they use each other's data. If there's a data set that they might be aware of in another side of the business, how we can perhaps facilitate them receiving that so they can better do their jobs. So the way in which these workshops worked is they were kind of a 2-stage breakout session. The first of which was a quick fire round where the statement you can see there, as a role, I want to need, so that's outcome. This was a statement to really reel off as many potential use cases we could possibly come up with in a short space of time. In the second stage of the workshops, on the right there is a template with an example of a developed use case within it. And so the idea was to take two or three of these statements and take them into a breakout room and further develop them to better understand what's required to facilitate them, who really benefits from them, and who's involved. So for the external workshops, I think there was approximately 60 external stakeholders, two sessions of 30, perhaps a bit less. I need to check that. And we developed over about 140 statements for use cases. Obviously, there were some duplicates because they were developed within breakout rooms, so we've rationalized that to about 109. And the way in which we've decided to drive the most value out of this work package was to group them within themes. And then after they've been grouped into themes, we would then identify the common data sets required to facilitate the use cases within that theme and utilize that to develop a kind of prioritization of data sets so we can see which are the low-hanging fruit to some extent so that those can be published on the trial hub and utilized by stakeholders to facilitate whatever they want to do with them. And there was a report summarizing the work during this work package, which is due to be released during next week. And I'll give you some information at the end about how you can receive that. Next, please. So that's where we're up to now at the end of work package 2. So we're only halfway through, and the work's been good so far. But I think we've still got quite a lot of meat on the project to get through for the latter half of this year. So this week, or next week rather, we kick off work package 3, where the openness assessment and processing starts. So the idea is that there's already been a degree of openness assessment already been developed by the Energy Data Task Force. We're going to take that and apply some kind of good practice data sharing policies that already exist within WPD and the industry to that process, and then try and push some trial data sets through it, and then go back to our data owners and see if they're comfortable with what the assessment suggests that openness classification should be about their data sets, and utilize that exercise to validate or refine the assessment process, whatever comes of it. There's also a degree of work in work package 3 that will identify how data is best presented on the hub in terms of the amount of assessment that needs, the amount of analytics that need to be done prior to publication to assist stakeholders that perhaps don't have that resource or power to be able to use that data, and the amount of contextualization that's required to promote the best understanding of that data. So that's running from next week until Q4. We're also kicking off work package 4 next week, wherein we're just looking to identify the best way that these data sets can be presented, perhaps visually, on a portal or a website. And so there's a degree of additional consultation with stakeholders we'd like to do for that. But for the start of the work package, we are really identifying the requirements to deploy and timescales, and then going to start drawing up plans for the hub. Just as a point on the hub, the idea is that largely the use cases identified that have third-party benefits, we want to ensure that the hub can enable them as a kind of self-service type affair as much as possible. So these stakeholders that have these use cases, they want to realise can do them themselves without additional help from us. But obviously, where some of the use cases that have been identified are slightly more complex, we may take them forward as internal activity, or reach out to those stakeholders and look to assist them with realising those use cases. And then in Q4 of this year, as a means to launch the hub and drive some immediate value from it, the idea is that we'll have pick a specific use case, one that we think is relevant to a lot of people, perhaps one of the trickier ones that might involve some complex data science or machine learning or something, and release it as a competition to some extent. The prize of which has yet to be defined, I'm afraid, but oh, I've missed some slides. But yeah, so there'll be a data science challenge at the end of this year. And in the next slide, I'll tell you how you can get involved. If you could move to that one, please. Thank you. And so, as I've said, we're looking for whilst we've concluded the work package with the engagement for the use case development, there's additional engagement we'd like to do, specifically now on the look and feel of the hub once we've drawn that up, and then later in Q4 for the data science challenge. And beyond what I discussed, what Pod is doing today, WPD, as a commitment to digitalisation, now has a dedicated team that's looking at this. So there's one email address below. I'd ask you, if you're interested in WPD data activity, to write to that and become a stakeholder. We're generating a new stakeholder list for data. You'll then be asked, notified of when we're looking to engage in regards to the pod project and also our wider data activity. We have a program now, and I think I'm correct in saying there's a consultation due to be released to our data stakeholders next week. So please do write to that email address prior to next week if you want sight and want to respond to that consultation. And next slide, please. I think that's all from me. So questions from you, please.
Thank you very much, Sam. And yes, please do continue to submit questions on Slido. So that's slido.com and put in the code EIF6. Sam, we had a couple around the sort of triage and the openness classifications slides from Paul Fjellrad. So really about some of the detail on if you're triaging data as either open, public, shared, or closed, the 3 open categories,
Yes.
at least, will there be metadata that's always open across those 3 categories? So are there any kind of further nuances in that classification?
No, yes.
And then a sort of second related bit, how are you ensuring that you don't triage an entire data set of closed if there's just a single attribute that would fall into the category?
Right, yes. On the first part, yes, the metadata is contained in the data catalog, Dublin Core metadata as part of Work Package 1. And the idea is that that will be, of the 3 open tiers, all the metadata collected as part of the project will be available in some form or another on the hub at the end of it. So yes, there will be a standardized metadata for data sets that can be that concern the public. There'll be metadata for all of them. I think this is largely as an effort to assist the realization of one of the other recommendations in the ENA Data Task Force, where I think there is some other activity to look at a kind of a master data repository or data catalog for the industry. And so the idea is that if we publish that metadata in a standardized form, then that's potentially available for a master catalog to be realized more quickly further down the line. And sorry, what was the second thing? Oh, yes. Yeah, sorry, I remember. So yes, as part of Work Package 3, there will be the second stage of it is to look at the high priority data sets and identify if there's a small degree of work, for instance, one field can be removed or some noise can be added to something to see if it's a minor change can actually elevate the openness of a data set. So where we're particularly interested in that is, I think obviously closed is probably going to remain closed, but where things are considered shared and public, we want to try and elevate those and ensure as much as open as possible. And so yes, there is a degree of data cleaning or data treatment that will happen as part of Work Package 3, just to ensure we're not falling back to the status quo.
Great. And moving on to the public-facing hub, we had a question from Evan Davis. You mentioned that as an interim solution. Is there a long-term solution?
No, interim solution is probably the wrong word. So obviously this is innovation. It's a trial. We want to know how it works. But interim is the wrong word that I used. I mean, it's more of a trial solution, but we're going to look to scale it up. But obviously, we don't want to do everything within the project. Obviously, the purpose of the trial is to validate that it works and ensure that we've kind of captured a solution that enables third parties to derive benefit. So when I say interim, I mean the solution is going to be developed under the project until January next year, and then it's very likely that beyond that we will scale up the hub as part of central business activity.
Great. And staying on the hub, the portal, question from Ryan Smith, whether there's potential for that to be open to third-party upload as well as download, noting that would add value, but recognising that there'd be challenges as well.
Yes, it's something that came up in the use case workshops. I suspect within the scope of the project, that's not going to be possible. I think the degree of complexity that adds to the solution is quite severe, and you need all sorts of additional functionality about verification, and you need third parties to contextualize and process their data in a uniform fashion. So perhaps as a follow-on, but not within pod, I'm afraid.
Thanks. And a question which has come in around collaboration now between DNOs, DSOs, as well as the third-party point you've just addressed. Could you go into a bit more detail about how that sort of collaboration across the industry is being undertaken on this? I mean, obviously flowing from the EDTF recommendations, but also specific to the project.
Yeah. So the idea is that the process that is being refined from what's already been written into the EGTF report will be pertinent to all network operators, and so during dissemination, perhaps run an internal workshop. I think at the data working group we agreed at the start of the project whereby we could talk through our findings for openness assessment and ensure that that benefits the entire networks industry, not just WPD. Yeah.
And Josh Hart asked a specific question about how the master catalogue might be used across networks. So is that something you're kind of discussing specifically within that?
No, the master catalogue isn't being looked at within this project. I believe there's something called Flexa that's looking into that. But yeah, as I say, at this time, it's falling outside of the remit of the project. So we're not specifically looking at it. We're just trying to ensure that our metadata is standardized to the extent where it can be utilized by a master catalog if and when there's a requirement to do so.
Sure. And a final question, in terms of quality control, quality assurance, just a bit more detail on how that's being managed and whether there are any differences in how it's managed between the categories once you've performed the triage.
Yeah, that's a difficult question. Obviously, as everyone will know, it has experience in the industry, and a lot of data sets, specifically historic data sets, the quality isn't ideal. And so this is something we're going to look at within the project with the next work package, where just like we're looking at perhaps elevating the openness classification, we're going to see if we can identify any major issues with data sets that we're going to upload and perhaps rectify them, or if not, just ensure that the relevant degree of context is there so people understand the data that they're using and the potential weaknesses of it. But yeah, that's about where we're at with data quality. I mean, it's a known issue, but something that we have to live with. And
that would apply across a lot of projects in this area, I suspect.
Yes, every project, I think.
Well, thank you very much, Sam, and thank you for the questions. If there's anything we haven't covered, then please do continue to submit questions. The email address for the pod project is also in Slido at the moment, as well as on those slides, and we'll send around the slide pack, of course, after the meeting. Our final presentation is 2050 South Wales. This is a whole system analysis project, so really picking up on a lot of the themes and questions that have come in today's discussion around how networks are collaborating, both transmission and distribution and across vector between electricity and gas. So this project a real example of that collaboration in action, as well, of course, as looking towards the net zero target and how we can reach that. In this case, in the context of South Wales. So we're joined by Linwei Chen, Innovation Engineer at National Grid Electricity Transmission, who's going to lead you through the project. Linwei.
Thanks, Matt. Can you hear me?
Yeah, all good.
Okay, good. Thanks, everyone. And just for your awareness, as Matt mentioned, that List 2050 project is a cross-network innovation project funded by National Grid Electricity Transmission, National Grid Gas Transmission, Wales and the West Utilities, and Western Power Distribution. And today I'm representing the whole project group to give a short presentation about this project. So next slide, please. And I will first cover the project overview, which includes the scope, key objectives, and the study boundaries. Then these are followed by the project governance, organizations, and the scope of each work package, and how to engage with us externally. Then I will also quickly take you through the project progress have been made so far. Next slide, please. Next one. Thanks, Vivian. So in line with government's target of net zero by 2050, the project aims to develop a plausible and optimized decarbonization pathways for the whole energy system in South Wales. This project aims to create a whole system approach. That's why it is formed by different work packages focusing on different sectors such as heat, transport, industry, generation, gas network, and also social economy impacts. And in the end, we aim to provide a clear direction for utilities on how to positively contribute to the net zero, not just within the South Wales, but we are also hoping that the learning could be applicable to the decarbonization work carried out in other UK regions. Next slide, please. And just to be more specific, the project has three key objectives. The first one is to identify a plausible decarbonization pathway for the energy system in South Wales. This will inform the investment choices for utilities, policy recommendations for the government, and also investment options for the business that may be supporting net zero in South Wales. And the pathways here means like a mixture of net zero or low carbon technologies used by the energy systems. And to identify pathways, we collect the evidence from credible sources to form bottom-up models in order to inform us the potential generation and the demand changes by 2050 and also the associated impacts. And finally, we aim to test and optimize the pathways at a system level, which considers energy balancing, carbon emission, and the cost. Next slide, please. And in terms of how the project is formed, then we will first start with the work packages to carry out the baseline analysis for the different sectors like industry, heat, and transport. Then we will develop a detailed bottom-up models to forecast the generation and the demand profiles by 2050, along with the network reinforcement costs. Then with the data, we have another work packages to create scenarios and optimize them considering carbon emission and the cost. And during the optimization, we may find opportunities to do some sensitivity studies along the assumptions made at the first beginning. For example, the energy efficiency for domestic heating and the heat pump sizing, which may significantly affect the network peak for adverse weather conditions. So in these cases, we will re-estimate the demand and the generation profiles, then run the simulation again, which forms an iterative optimization process. And once the results are validated, the outcomes will be shared with stakeholders for feedback, and also the final reports on recommendations with least regret options towards net zero will also be published. Next slide, please. And in terms of the study boundaries for geography, the project covers 14 local authority areas within South Wales, and the demand and the generation profiles will be aggregated at the local authority area with at least hourly resolution. And for timescale, the project's looking forward to 2050, but also with stepping points in year 2030 and 2040. For each year, the optimization studies is based on annual profiles with hourly resolution. And in terms of energy system, the project covers the whole energy system in South Wales, including electricity, heat, gas, transport, and industry. And it will also consider the energy being imported or exported from within South Wales, by using the projections forecast by the National Grid Future Energy Scenario Study. And in terms of carbon emissions, the project will consider the carbon reduction in a wider context for transport and industry, where we'll estimate the residual carbon emissions by 2050. But for agriculture and land use, we tend to use the CCC reports on wells as a reference input for the study. Next slide, please. And next one. Thanks, Vivian. And this slide shows how the project is organized with the partners, suppliers, and the key stakeholders. The project is structured by a project board and 11 working groups and a review committee. The project board has representatives from National Grid Electricity Transmission, Gas Transmission, Western Power Distribution, and the West and the Wales utilities to provide overall direction for the project. And then we have 11 working groups from different suppliers to deliver the technical work. I will cover the scope of each working group later. And the review committee is chaired by the Welsh government and has participants from wider stakeholders, for example, experts from utilities, energy consultants, universities, and also the South Wales industry cluster. And it's also worth mentioning that there's another NIA project funded by Western Power Distribution and Wales and West utilities to also look after the net zero scenarios for the energy distribution system within South Wales. The outcome from that project will also be fed into this project as a reference source to be considered when carrying out the optimization study. Next slide, please. And in terms of roles and responsibility for different structure, the project board is trying to provide overall project directions and function. And we have invited ARP to chair the monthly board meetings so we can keep neutral interest for the project. And as I mentioned before, the working groups are responsible for delivering technical work for a project. And we have bi-weekly calls with all working groups to discuss the progress, share outputs, and agree assumptions if needed. And the review committee is responsible for reviewing the outputs and also challenging the results with recommendations. Next slide, please. So just to give you an overview of the scope for each working group. For work package 1, it is about estimating both embedded and non-embedded generation profiles within South Wales by using the local weather data. And for work package 2, a detailed bottom-up model for estimating heat and transport energy for the Swansea, Newport, and Cardiff cities will be developed. And for work package 3, the study will calculate the reinforcement cost for both distribution networks and also the transmission networks as well. And we will also carry out a study to assess different solutions to reduce the cost, for example, through district heating, energy storage, and also vehicle-to-grid solutions. And for work package 4, an evidence-based approach will be used to forecast the future energy demands from the road transport, railways, marine, and the aviation sectors. And the work package 5 will carry out site surveys to collect industry decarbonization options and also estimate the future energy demand. Next slide, please. So work package 6 is about understanding the social economic impacts of decarbonization on South Wales, and it will use baseline analysis on the economic growth and the population trend to propose 3 future scenarios and also study the relevant impacts. work package 7 will integrate all work package outputs and build and test social economy scenarios. This will enable us to identify an optimal pathway for the whole system modeling. And the work package 8 is about communication and the dissemination with external stakeholders. And the work package 9 will carry out network reinforcement studies to assess the requirements for future network gas network to supply hydrogen, for example. And the work package 10 will do technical and economy assessment of carbon capture, utilization, and storage options. This is important for decarbonizing industry demand, which is currently dominated by fossil fuels and natural gases. And the work package 11 will use another pathfinder to try to validate the optimized scenarios. Next slide, please. And this diagram shows how the data flows between work packages. First, work package 6 will define the socio-economic scenarios and provide some common assumptions across the project, for example, population trend. And then for each scenario, work packages 1, 2, 4, and 5 will produce generation or demand profiles by 2050. Then this data will be passed to work package 3 and 9 to estimate the network reinforcement cost. With the demand profiles and the cost data ready, the work package 7 will carry out optimization study to identify a pathway. Then the results will be validated by work package 11 and also be passed back to work package 6 to study the social economy impacts. Next slide, please. So in terms of our output disseminations, we have two platforms. The first one is our project website, which is currently under development, and it will be released next month. And meanwhile, we will also have a Slack collaboration hub. If interested, you can join the hub and follow or post any thoughts on the topics relevant to the project. Once the website is ready, we will also publish more dissemination events or webinars. So hopefully you can get more news or outputs from the project later. And next slide, please. Just to give you a quick update on where we are now in terms of progress. For work package 1, we have collected 20 years of historical weather data for South Wales, including wind speed, solar irradiance, and the temperature. And by studying the weather pattern, we have identified a typical year of weather to be used by other work packages that can be used by other work packages to forecast demands in 2030, 2040, and 2050. And we have also developed a model to estimate the renewable generation installed capacities, considering using the weather data per local authority. And for work package 2, from the initial stakeholder engagement, the study has proposed 3 decarbonization options, which are hydrogen, electrification, and hybrid, considering both hydrogen boilers and hybrid heat pumps. And we have developed a model to estimate spatial and temporal demands for the heating using the dwelling types, energy efficiency, and outdoor temperature. And we are now in the process of producing half-hourly heat demands for the 3 cities under those 3 decarbonization options, and the results will be fed into work package 7 to identify a most economy option for heating. Next slide, please. And for work package 3, we have established a method to carry out network reinforcement study. And for distribution network, we will follow the ENA P26 guidance on security of supply to determine the criteria when we can upgrading a primary access. For transmission network, we will use the criteria set out in SQSS. And meanwhile, we have collected the reinforcement data from Ofgem and also building the electricity network models for South Wales. So once the demand data are ready, we can start the network option assessment study immediately. And for work package 4, we have carried out a literature review to investigate different decarbonization options for road transport. From the evidence we collected so far, domestic cars are going to be EV-based, but for heavy good vehicles, it's going to be a mixture of for using battery, hydrogen, or biomethane. And we are now in the process of estimating the HGV demands, which will also be passed to work package 7 for optimization study. And we have also developed a model to estimate EV charging profiles, considering residential, work, slow, and rapid public charging. And also the demand estimations for railway, marine, and the aviation sectors are also undergoing. Next slide, please. So for work package 5, we have conducted 12 site engagement surveys to collect their energy demand data and also understanding their decarbonization options, which mainly includes energy efficiency improvement, fuel switching to electricity or hydrogen, and on-site renewable generation, and also the use of CCUS. And based on the survey results, we have estimated the future industry demand by 2050, considering 3 sensitivities: high electrification, high hydrogen, and also plausible sensitivity. Then these results will be given into work package 7 optimization study. And for work package 6, we have analyzed the baseline data on GVA growth, population, household, and the employment trends from 2000 to 2018. And we have also analyzed the current status of energy consumptions from different sectors like industry, commercial, domestic, and transport. Then using the population projections by the government and also the decarbonization cost projections by CCC, the study has proposed 3 scenarios, which are current trend, green industry growth, and services-led growth. These scenarios will be reviewed by our review committee to agree the common assumptions for our work packages. And for work package 7, we are now preparing the optimization tool to adopt the outputs from different work packages. Next slide, please. For work package 8, we are now just finalizing the content for website and also preparing a dissemination program. And the work package 9 has evaluated hydrogen supply options and also carried out initial studies to estimate the levelized cost of hydrogen and also the potential reuse of existing gas transport assets for hydrogen transport and distribution. Work package 10 has reviewed the carbon volumes to be captured and exported, and now preparing a technical specification draft for carbon exports. And the work package 11 has built a South Wales baseline in a Pathfinder tool, and also preparing the tool to test scenarios once the data are ready. Next slide, please. So just to close out my presentation today, and the next step for us is try to finalize the generation and the demand forecast. This will enable us to carry out network reinforcement study and also the Pathfinder optimization. and we are aiming to publish the final outputs in January next year. So that's all from me. Thank you for your time and questions.
Thank you very much, Linwei. So we've got probably 10 minutes or so for any questions. Please do continue to add those to slido.com and enter EIF6. So Linwei, we had a few kind of questions around the cost estimates that you're using, and specifically around sort of cost estimates for green gas as against existing natural gas, or to the earlier conversation, whatever we're choosing to call it. I won't ask you to sort of comment directly on the kind of pence per kilowatt hour, unless you particularly like to. But the kind of thrust of the question there, I guess, also speaks to the kind of huge range of sources that you could potentially use for input and data in this project, and how you're kind of going about kind of developing the right inputs and sourcing the information that you need across the project.
So, yeah, thanks, Matt. In terms of getting the sources as input for projects, we are trying to use the sources from credible sources, like from the government, like the Ofgem, and particularly for these production cost for the green and the blue hydrogens, we are considering the technology like ATR and STR with carbon CCS or without CCS. But currently, we just done the initial studies, and it's based on flat assumptions from now to 2050. But we will consider like the cost changes and up to 2050, because currently the blue hydrogen will be much cheaper than the green hydrogen. But going forward, with more renewable generation connected to the network, the cost for green hydrogen will drop. So yeah, we will take that into consideration. Great.
And we'll also send round a link to attendees in relation to those questions to some research which the Gas Goes Green project published last month on hydrogen production costs and kind of future projections, particularly for green hydrogen costs over the period between now and 2050, which might be interesting in the context of those questions. You can see the question at the top there as well on the integrated development of low carbon energy systems project being run by Imperial College. I guess it'd be interesting both whether there's any direct interaction with the IDLES project, and more generally how the Zero 2050 project is working with other projects. Clearly, there's a lot of work across industry looking at the options for both different regions and for the UK as a whole. So perhaps you could touch a bit on that as well.
Yes, in terms of this particularly IDLES research program, personally, unfortunately I'm not quite aware of this, but I can certainly arrange this liaison from these two projects. So hopefully we can exchange some outputs from these two projects.
Great.
And we are also heavily involved with the South Wales Industry Cluster, and I understand from that they are also trying to set up an innovation program around the industrial decarbonization, and also the outputs from this project will also fit into that, into their innovation program. So yeah.
And related to that, I guess we've also had a question about the replicability of the Zero 2050 approach to other parts of the UK. Is that something you're kind of taking account of in the program design and thinking about at this stage, or would that be something you'd kind of consider later down the line?
Yes, we will consider this when we're developing this model. So when we develop the bottom-up models, for example, for estimating generation, transport, and heating, although in this project we are specifically focusing on the South Wales, but I don't see any issues that we can extend to like take inputs from the other UK regions to also forecast the demands.
And related to that, you can see a question that's just come in at the bottom of the screen there, which is around the kind of range of modelling tools developed by network innovation projects and what's likely to be made public from this work in terms of the models and the data sets they use.
Sorry, Matt. Which one questions you mentioned?
It's just moved off the public screen, but I think actually Dave Richardson's question is relevant to it as well. It's fundamentally how open is the data and the modelling going to be from 0 to 2050?
In the end, we'll definitely publish the reports with key outputs from the projects, but as this is an NIA-funded projects, so if we can have offline discussion about how to share the data, I don't think it's going to be an issue about how if we can get more detailed data for third party.
Great.
Could I just add to that Lin-Wei mentioned there was a subsidiary project looking at distribution level modelling out to 2050 and net zero. That project is now completed and the data set and the methodology is available if anyone's looking for it. Sorry to butt in.
Not at all. Thank you, Sam. That's helpful. And finally, I think, Lin-Wei, unless any other questions come in, you put up your kind of timeline for project milestones. Is there any plan to kind of release initial findings prior to the full reports, or is there likely to be anything for sort of industry stakeholders to comment on before you reach the sort of full reporting stage?
Yes, definitely there will be some interim reports be released before the project completes. But before that, because it's a cross-network funded projects, and we also have a review committee to review all of our outputs. So we have set up monthly review meetings with all the stakeholders. So after the meeting, we will discuss our outputs, and also we will discuss if it's worth to publish the results after the meeting.
Great. The link to the Slack which you put up earlier is in the Slido chat, and of course the presentation slides will come around as well. So thank you very much for that, Lin-Wei. I'm going to put a couple of onto the Slido now. First of all, around how helpful you have found the forum, and we'd really appreciate your feedback on that. And then we will also put up a poll around, or an open sort of poll, where you can suggest topics that you'd like to see presented at future forums, so at future events like this, and obviously that will really help us shape the topics and the presentations. Please do continue to ask any questions or provide any feedback in the Slido chat as well. If you lost or out of the presentations. Otherwise, from my perspective, I'd just like to say thank you very much to all of our presenters from across the networks today. Hopefully that's given you a really good overview both of the innovation strategies and our approach to collaboration around network innovation in general, as well as the opportunity to to learn a bit more about some of the projects which are being delivered to help us on the journey to net zero energy system. Most of all, though, I'd like to say thank you very much for all of the contributions. They're really important both to the individual project leads and also to the energy innovation strategies and the ENA team. Your input really helped us shape those strategies, and it will continue to do so going forward. So please do use the Slido. And give us any feedback both on this and on future events. I'm going to open up the other poll now. So that's a free word entry. Please enter any topics you'd like to see at the future forums. And otherwise, thank you very much for joining us today. And we hope to see you at another event soon. Thank you.
It's really interesting that the biggest item here, so it's Ian Cooper from UKPN talking, is creating markets as well as inertia. That's a general, quite a general topic, and keen to understand if there's any specific markets that people are talking about or wanting to be created. Because certainly within the electricity networks, there are markets for flexibility services. So those are already available. They're in their infancy, but within different organisations. So keen to see what from a network's point of view people would like to see. And yeah, post either as words on the sheet or as a question on the Q&A, to give us a little bit more information about what it is that you want, because yeah, as described there, it's not clear to us.